This episode of Reading Trek is brought to you by our patrons. You too can support this vibrant fan-based podcast network by visiting patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. For as little as $1 a month, patrons gain exclusive early access to some of our unedited shows, interviews, and even get to join in on exclusive patron-only chats. We have lots more patron content on the way that you won't want to miss, so visit patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions and be sure to mention that Reading Trek sent you. Put down that remote, set your phaser to stun, and pick up that paperback.
You do have books in the 24th century.
Welcome to episode 15 of Reading Trek, a Star Trek book club podcast and proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am your host, Marty Allee, and today I am joined by very special guest star, Christian Juel. Christian, how are you doing today?
I am doing wonderful, Marty. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Welcome to Reading Trek, your first time here.
Well, thank you. And
for a very interesting book choice as well.
Very different for a Star Trek book, indeed.
For those who are new to the podcast, we are a book club podcast working our way through the Star Trek Expanded Universe one novel at a time, discussing the characters, plot, writing, and piecing it together into the larger Trek universe as we pull out the meanings and messages of the text. Although we do encourage you to read along with us, the show was designed to give all Trek fans a way to journey through the EU together, even if you haven't read the books. Like we mentioned just now, today's novel is going to be Redshirts by John Scalzi.
That's the book. I know it's a book. The book.
And we do have a little bit of author information for you today. John Scalzi is an American science fiction writer and former president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. He is best known for his Old Man War series, 3 novels which have been nominated for the Hugo Award, and for his blog titled Whatever, where he has written on a number of topics since 1998. He won the Hugo Award for Best Fan Writer in 2008, based predominantly on that blog, which he has also used for several charity drives. His novel Redshirts, which we're covering today, won the 2013 Hugo Award for Best Novel. He has written nonfiction books and columns on diverse topics such as finance, video games, films, astronomy, writing, and politics, and served as a creative consultant for the TV series Stargate Universe. Before we dive into this week's novel, let's let everyone know how they can get a hold of the show. You can find Reading Trek on Twitter at Reading Trek, online at readingtrek.thetricordertransmissions.com, where you can also leave us a voice message by tapping on the new bar on the side of the page. That'll allow you to leave up to a 2-minute voice memo for us. You can reach us by email at readingtrekpodcast@gmail.com and like our page on Facebook and leave us a star rating and review on iTunes to help with our visibility. All right, let's get right into it. But before we start the summary, Black Alert, spoilers ahead for John Scalzi's Redshirts.
Black Alert. Black Alert.
In the prologue, several senior officers of the Intrepid, flagship of the Universal Union, lament the unusually high number of casualties of low-ranking crew members during recent away missions and conclude that they will need more crewmen to replace them. Docking at a spaceport, the Intrepid takes on 5 new ensigns, including Andrew Dahl, an expert in alien religions and xenobiology. Dahl quickly discerns that the crew is extremely phobic of being near the senior officers and of going on away missions due to their unusually high fatality rates. Over the course of several away missions, various crew members suggest that the deaths are due to incompetence, superstition, or cosmic forces, requiring the sacrifices of some crew members so that others will survive. After several close calls, Dahl meets Jenkins, a crew member who offers a different theory. Their reality and timeline are under the periodic influence of a badly written television show from the past, and the writers create the plot. Characters' free will temporarily cease in order to progress the narrative of the show. Otherwise, good officers occasionally seem incompetent, ensigns make poor decisions, and the ship has mysterious technology on board to produce last-minute inventions and medications which would otherwise be impossible to produce due to the narrative. Jenkins explains that with Dahl and the other ensigns' otherwise routine duties, their colorful histories will inevitably make them targets of the narrative when the writers need glorified extras to kill for emotional impact. The ensigns kidnap a senior officer and proceed to travel to the past with the mission of convincing them to stop the show. Once there, they meet their actor doubles and realize they are exact parallels down to their scars and skin blemishes. Even their imagined backstories become integral events of the ensign's life. Using this to their advantage, Dahl strikes a deal with the show's producer and head writer, who happens to be Jenkins' double, to save the life of the producer's comatose son by switching him with his crew member doppelganger. Because the producer's son appeared on the show as an extra, one of the crew members is effectively his identical twin and will revert to the young man's personality by staying in the past. Conversely, Dahl reasons that bringing the comatose son into the future will allow them to use the narrative to their advantage, letting the advanced technology and reality-altering properties of the writing revive him. Dahl and the ensigns return to the future and live out their new, revised plot created by the head writer, which includes saving the injured crewmen they had on board. While saving the ship, Dahl sacrifices himself to save a senior officer for the sake of the narrative. Awakening later, Dahl receives a message from the writers and producers explaining his recovery, and they promise to make the lives of the crew meaningful instead of using death as a quick plot device. Dahl then compares the close calls he's had with those of the TV show's protagonists and deduces that there is another narrative protecting him, which means that he is actually the protagonist of another story. The end.
Roll to credits.
All right, so let's get right into the discussion. Christian, what are your first thoughts on Redshirts?
It was a book at first that I almost had a hard time picking up and getting into. It took me several weeks to actually start to delve into it and to really understand what was happening. In my mind, I think I was seeing it too much as a Star Trek story and trying to fit it into that mold. And, you know, having read hundreds of Star Trek books in my past, it was a little outside of my comfort zone, but I actually ended up enjoying it a lot more than I thought I was going to.
I enjoyed it a lot from the get-go. I thought it was funny, it was meta, there was time travel in it, it was everything that I could have hoped for and more in a quote-unquote Star Trek novel, even though it's not really Star Trek, but it kind of is. They reference Star Trek a whole lot in the book, so...
The opening scene really threw me for a loop because I felt like we got to know this one Redshirt character. They really spent a lot of time plotting him out, and
you think he's going to be the main star of the show, and then
he's dead.
End of the chapter, he's dead.
But I think that really did a really...
Is he the one that gets eaten by the worms?
I believe so.
Yeah.
They did a good job of setting that up, though, to letting you know what you're going to expect for at least the first third of the book.
I feel like it's like a 3-act structure almost. You have the first third of the book where they're kind of... They're new to the Intrepid. They're figuring it all out. They're getting used to their roles, and something's not quite right. The second act is when they figure out what's going on, and they're coming up with this plan to fix all of it. And then we have the third act, which is the time travel act. Mm-hmm. So I really liked how he used the 3-act structure in this book.
Yes,
played very much like it would on a television show almost. So what did you think of the overall plot?
The overall plot, I had a hard time in the beginning with it just because I didn't know where it was going to go at first. And when they brought in the narrative aspect and really broke that fourth wall away, and which is something that we never see in any kind of science fiction, really, except for episodes like maybe Far Beyond the Stars or something, where they break into it. But this blew me away, and I really felt like once they opened that wall, I was able to love the characters a lot more than I was before.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. Once we found out what's kind of really going on in this novel, that just kind of, all right, I'm all in. Let's figure out what's going on. Yeah.
And break into the ridiculousness of it. I mean, when I first started reading...
It was so unpredictable because it was so ridiculous. I couldn't figure out what was going to happen next. I don't think I've ever laughed so hard and also cried so hard reading the same book. And we can talk about that third coda later, because I know that's going to be a big discussion point for both of us. So.
Yeah, that should come later. But laughing, I think Duval was probably my favorite character, Maya Duval, who was the only female redshirt ensign. Yeah. And she just had this personality about her that just did not give two francs. So she's sleeping with one of the lieutenants. She's sleeping with one of the ranked officers. But she treats him like total dirt when she's with him. And he just takes it. And it was hilarious.
It's so funny. The meta-ness of it all. So they're on a TV show. They go back in time and meet the actors who play them. Then Dahl realizes that maybe he's the protagonist of his very own, very special story, which is the story that we're currently reading. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a very clever way to kind of wrap it all up.
Yeah.
I have multiple meta-nesses, meta-nai, whatever the plural form of meta is, highlighted. So let's start with the big reveal on page 102 and 103. In all my research, there's only one spaceship I found that has even remotely the same sort of statistical patterns for away missions, Jenkins said. He rummaged through the graphic elements again and then threw one onto the screen. They all stared at it. Duval frowned. I don't recognize this ship, she said. And I thought I knew every type of ship we had. Is this a W ship? Not exactly, Jenkins said. It's from the United Federation of Planets. Duval blinked and focused her attention back at Jenkins. Who are they? She asked. They don't exist, Jenkins said, and pointed back at the ship. And neither does this. This is the Starship Enterprise. It's fictional. It was on a science fictional drama series, and so are we. And that's the moment that I was all in on this book. Is that the same moment you kind of got all in?
Just about. When they really broke down that wall for me, that was when it just became such a different story than what we had read so far. Because so far it had been mission after mission of people dying and people unsure and people trying to figure things out. So it was a necessary change for me.
And I think at just the right moment of the book, too. Is there anything you want to highlight regarding the meta-ness of the story?
I have a quote that I had highlighted towards the end of the book, which is kind of on the meta-ness. Because whenever I read books, I typically will find at least one quote that really stands out to me. And I want to remember it. It's on page 229. And Hansen, kind of the total unknown character, because he's the one that we never really got to know.
No, right. He's just kind of a background character for this.
He's the poor Nurse Ogawa. So he says, then maybe you can believe this, Hansen said. Whether you're an extra or the hero, this story is about to end. When it's done, whatever you want to be will be up to you, and only you. It will happen away from the eyes of any audience and from the hand of any writer. You will be your own man. So I think that ties into a lot of what you were saying about his discovery that maybe the story is more about who he is and what he will become.
Yeah. Oh, so there's one more that's very meta. When they are in the past and Dahl is about to meet his doppelganger for the first time on page 161. So Duval is talking to Dahl's doppelganger, which in this story, his name is Abnett. His last name is Abnett. Mm-hmm. Well, that's science fiction television for you, though, Abnett said. Someone's got to be the red shirt. The what? Duval said. The red shirt, Abnett said. You know, in the original Star Trek, they always had Kirk, Bones, and Spock, and then some poor dude in a red shirt who got vaporized before the first commercial. The moral of the story was not to wear a red shirt or go on away missions when you're the only one whose name isn't in the opening credits.
That was one of my 3 major highlights from the book. To me, that sums up what this book is. It kind of sums up the message or the theme of what the book is. So we talked about the 3-part...
The 3-act structure?
The 3-act structure. And if I can break into kind of relating in a sense to the Star Trek universe, the first part to me, and based on the publication date of the book too, I believe it was 2010?
2012, I think, is
okay.
what I saw, yeah.
So it was very soon after the J.J. Abrams reboot universe.
Yes.
And I felt like the beginning of the book had a very Kelvin universe vibe to it.
I got that too, yeah.
The way the crewmates were out drinking and having fun and playing pranks on each other. It was a very young Kelvin atmosphere to me.
Yes. I agree completely with you there. I kind of envisioned the Intrepid actually as like that JJ style Enterprise to hair dryers and a frisbee. So
yes.
So more discussion points here. Hester, one of the main characters of the book, kind of a background player for a while, but then ends up being the one who's integral to them getting what they want from the writers. So he makes this decision to stay behind and save Matthew Paulson, his doppelganger, who got in an accident and was now comatose. And I really like the parallels between those 2 characters, how they're basically the same person. They're both just kind of skating by in life, not really doing anything. And then Hester decides, oh, I like this is important. This is something I can do something with my life now. So this is when Hester first looks down at his doppelganger. Sorry, Hester said, I don't mean to be an asshole. It's just, well, now it all makes sense, doesn't it? What do you mean, Dahl asked. About me, Hester said. You and Duvall and Hansen and Finn are all interesting because you have to have interesting backstories so you could all get killed off in contextual way. Finn getting killed by someone he knew, right? You about to be killed when you go back to Forshan. But I didn't have anything unusual about me. I'm just some guy from Des Moines who had a B- average in high school who joined the W Fleet to see some of the universe before he came back home and stayed. Before I came on the Intrepid, I was just another sarcastic loner. And now it makes sense because I was never meant to do anything special, was I? I really was an extra. A placeholder character who Paulson could pour his kid into until his kid got bored playing actor and went back to school to get a doctorate. Even the one thing I can do, pilot a shuttle, is just something that got stuck in the show because someone needed to be in the seat. And why not give it to the producer's kid? Make him feel special. I don't think it's like that, Dahl said. It's exactly like that, Hester. I meant to fill a spot and that's it. That's not true at all, Dahl said. No, Hester looked up at Dahl. What's my first name? What? Dahl asked. What's my first name? Hector repeated. You're Andy Dahl, Mena Duvall, Jimmy Hansen, Anatoly Kerensky, and for Christ's sake, what's my first name, Andy? You don't know, do you?
So this, and even when they started talking with Hester here, he was a character that I was like, oh yeah, him. And that's exactly how they played this scene here. But he becomes that destiny character, the character who's destined to save the universe, who's destined to save everyone, save humanity in a sense.
Yeah, to save all of these characters who have spawned because of this ridiculous television show. But I mean, for such like a silly book, this is some like heavy text, you know?
It was the whole Matthew and Hester doppelganger relationship was super heavy. Just, people coming and seeing him in the hospital in his coma, and then the people who would see Hester up and moving and losing their cool and just losing it because they thought, oh my gosh, he's survived, he has healed. It was very hard to read.
I read stuff like this and I'm just like, but this book is a comedy. It was like when Glee first premiered, it was a comedy, but then it turned into a dramedy. That's kind of like the vibe I get from this book. Like a little bit dramedy.
Well, speaking of dramedy, if we want to talk about another character who was kind of in, kind of out, was Finn. And, Finn was killed pretty early. in a very tragic
About halfway
way.
through, I think he gets killed.
He was a suicide bombing victim.
Yeah,
And
basically.
he wasn't even supposed to be on the mission where he died. He switched with Maya because they thought that Maya was the one who was written to be killed then. And so he took her place. And us, the reader, were like, oh my gosh. So they tricked the narrative, and this is fine. You know, happy ending, roll the credits. And then, surprise, this guy that he knows has
Surprise, this guy's got a bomb in his head, and his head explodes and nearly kills everybody. Kills Finn. And then later on, when they're in the past, Dahl ends up at a bar and runs into Finn's doppelganger, who's the bartender. And I did not see that coming. I didn't think they were going to run into Finn in the... I thought, oh, he's done. We'll never see him again. Nope. There he is. And that was a super, like, sweet moment.
Yeah.
So...
Which is totally tried to track, but maybe I'll save that moment for when we talk about ties.
So another thing that I'm a big fan of is time travel, as all of our listeners probably already know. And I was super let down by that DS9 time travel novel that wasn't really a time travel novel at all. I don't even remember the name of it. It was in the middle of the Invasion series, Time's Enemy.
The only thing I remember about that one, I was in high school, and listeners, not to age myself, that was like 20 years ago. The only thing I remember about that book was the terrorist attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, those really stood out. And that's why, of the 4 invasions.
And those were written pre 9/11. I
Yeah.
think that was a big discussion point we had when we covered those novels, but anyways, neither here nor there. I love time travel and everything to do with time travel. They're some of my favorite episodes of Star Trek, and I really love that there was time travel in this book, and we get a little bit of technobabble when they're talking about how they're time traveling and what's going to happen to them if they stay there. It has to do with conversion of mass and energy, Jenkins said. All the atoms you're using now are being used in the past. If you stay in the past, the atoms have to be in 2 places at the same time. This creates an imbalance, and the atoms have to decide where to be, and eventually they'll choose their then present configuration, because technically speaking, you're from the future, so you don't actually exist yet. And I've never heard a better retelling of Back to the Future than I have right there.
They needed to make it a race of time to get back there and back again. You know, they couldn't mess around.
But again, the meta-ness of the book, they acknowledge that the writers created the race in time, and that's the reason they have to race against time. So it's like, oh my god, I just can't.
Well, you got
so much awesomeness.
You gotta fit it in a 45-minute episode.
True, you do, and this book would fit in a 45-minute episode, I think. But
it could be a 2-parter.
It could be a 2-parter on Voyager. No, it couldn't. Who are we kidding? It'll never happen. But what did you think about the kind of Star Trek 4 quality they gave their time travel, where which is now kind of like a running gag through all the series is each series then goes back to the time that it was produced and does a time travel episode there. And that's exactly kind of what they did here.
Yeah.
Because they went back to 2012. So how did you feel about them tying that back to Star Trek 4 in a way?
It was fun. They really did a good job of making you feel like you were in the time period. And I mean, it wasn't ridiculous with people with mohawks and boomboxes on buses, but
oh my gosh, and their phones, the rudimentary connection. Be patient with them.
The phones and the bullets. It's like there are 2 things that really stuck out to me that were just kind of out of place in this book, but
I looked it up on a site called IMDb. I listened to the audiobook version of this, narrated by the wonderful Will Wheaton, who does a lot of John Scalzi's books. And the way he narrated those kind of moments was absolutely perfect. Just that kind of inquisitive.
I can imagine with his intonation and the tone of his voice sarcasm that came through.
Yeah, it was great. It was pretty great. What else do we have?
Well, we talked about Jenkins some.
We did.
So Jenkins...
Should we dive into it? Should we get into it?
Let's talk about Jenkins a little bit.
Okay.
So Jenkins is the mole man who lives in the walls. And
he basically lives in what is the Jeffries tubes of the Intrepid, yeah.
And they describe him as a Yeti. Now, in my head, I was imagining, oh gosh, I forget her name. Star Trek VI, Iman's character, when she becomes the tall alien on Rua Penthe. So I was imagining that kind of creature at first. I'm like, wait a second, Yeti? No. And so then the more I thought about it, and this is totally...
I think it's just like tall and hairy, like beard overgrown. And
it's totally off topic, and listeners, I'm so sorry. But then all I could think about was on Friends when Rachel runs into the cute guy who is all bushy and overgrown named Joshua. And that's all she could talk about was Joshua.
Uh-huh. The one with Joshua. Yeah, of course.
We're coming back now, so sorry.
Don't apologize. Don't ever apologize.
But so Jenkins is the mole man. He lives in the walls. He lost his wife, and
yes,
he kind of escaped reality and escaped everything. But at the same time, he's been able to piece together the meta-ness
of what's happening, yeah.
Yeah, what's really going on in the ship.
Yes, Jenkins was... I wasn't sure about his character at first. I was just like, what? Because at first, like in the first act, he's kind of just like popping out and saying a bunch of crap and then like going back behind the wall, and everybody's just like, who the F is this dude? Like, you know.
Well, I mean, I think the one thing he really says that sticks with you when Dahl first meets him is stay off the bridge.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, okay.
But his backstory is actually very, very tragic. And again, this is one of those quotes that I pulled out of a comedy book, keep in mind. I haven't been happy since my wife died, Jenkins said. It was her death that got me onto all of this anyway. Looking at the statistics of death on the ship, seeing how the events of the ship played themselves out, figuring that the most logical explanation was that we were part of a television show, realizing my wife died simply to be a dramatic moment before a commercial. That in this television show, she was a bit player, an extra. She probably had about 10 seconds of airtime. No one watching the episode probably had any memory of her now. They probably don't know her first name was Margaret, or that she liked white wines more than red, or that I proposed to her in her parents' front yard during a family reunion, or that we were married for 7 years before some hack decided to kill her. But I remember her. Tragic.
It was tragic.
Tragic backstory. Comedy book. That kind of writing in a comedy book. Like, I gotta give props to John Scalzi. Like,
yeah.
he's a master of his craft. I haven't read any of his other books yet, but I think I have 3 of them up on my bookshelf waiting to be read. So I'm very excited to see if they're this kind of same quality, which I'm sure they are. But were you expecting at all that his wife would come back at the ends to be kind of like the anchor of the entire novel?
Not at all. Not at all. It was a total shock to me, and it wound up being my favorite part of the entire book.
Yeah, mine too. So at the end of the narrative of this book, where Dahl is our protagonist, it's followed by 3 coda chapters. The first coda chapter is about the head writer of the show, kind of going a little bit crazy because he has writer's block now that he doesn't know how to write without killing off characters. Not my favorite part of the book.
Yeah, that one was kind of...
It was a little lengthy. Yeah. No, that's okay to say.
Okay.
We can be positively critical here.
Okay.
The second coda was a little better because it explored what happens to Matthew, thank you.
The coma patient.
The coma patient
is actually Hester.
Yes, they swapped bodies, yes. And so Matthew wakes up from his coma, but a week later having no memory of that week when he was actually Esther,
And
questions everything, like any sane person would. Realizing that there's
head injuries,
there's no
you
signs
will
of the
forget
injuries on
things,
his
but-
body, and he's kind of what happened during that week. It was an interesting deep dive into like the psyche of a coma patient. But then the third coda, which I think is where the real meat of the book is, because I have a lot tabbed in that third coda. Jenkins sends Dahl with a package to deliver to the actress who played his wife on the television show. Again, super meta. If it's confusing, you can email me. I'll explain it all. So she gets this package, which includes videos, letters, pictures, basically the entire history of Jenkins and Margaret's relationship, their entire 7-year marriage. And she's left to sort through all of that. And that's what Coda 3 is really about. It's her delving through all her doppelganger, her reincarnated self, if you will.
But at the same time, realizing how unhappy she is in her own life.
Exactly.
She goes on numerous blind dates.
It's one chapter, and it has so much depth to it. And if you didn't make it all the way to Coda 3, by all means read Coda 3, because it's spectacular. It's the heart and soul of this entire novel, in my opinion. I know you have a lot to say about it, so I'm going to let you speak
for a character who we don't even meet. She's just mentioned a handful of times.
We did not actually meet Jenkins' wife because she's already dead, but we did meet the actress who played her.
Briefly.
Yeah.
And if I can just get to me what it was the whole death and rebirth. That to me is what this segment was about. And I'm not a spiritual person, but I do believe in something after we go. And she basically takes this life of someone else and melds it with her.
Yeah.
And they become one person.
It's so beautiful. And the way it was written was so beautiful too. I don't know if you have the same thing highlighted as me.
I've read it a few times now, and every time I read it, I can't help but just cry.
I think I read it 4 times this afternoon, and I've spent majority of the day up in my room just like in tears because I thought this was so beautiful. So go ahead.
So to kind of build up on the moment, the package that she's been given by Jenkins is just like the bodies had people stayed over in the past or in the future would basically disintegrate. So she almost has to get rid of the stuff because it's not going to last. The pictures, the videos, it's not going to last.
It's going to disappear in 6 days.
So what she's done is she has basically burnt all of this stuff and taken it with her to the beach. So I will start this lovely paragraph. Samantha Martinez stands ankle deep in the ocean, not too far from the Santa Monica Pier, and sprinkles the remains of Margaret Jenkins' life in the place where she will one day have been on her honeymoon. She does not hurry in the task, taking time between each handful of ash and sand to remember Margaret's words and her life and her love, bringing them inside of her and letting them become part of her, whether for the first time or once again. Just in my head, I imagine her almost taking them as they go in the water and rubbing them on her body and just enveloping them inside of her.
Enveloping her spirit and her love and everything about her, yeah.
But then the most amazing thing happens.
Yes.
The most amazing thing is this guy sees her doing this and he's like, whoa, what are you doing? Did you lose someone? And she says, it's basically my sister. They kind of recognize each other, and it turns out he was the actor who played Jenkins on the show. And they reconnect, and they have this moment where they kind of see each other almost for the first time, and they see more in each other than they did before. And so they agree to go out and get something to eat, and they walk away with their arms around each other. And it's just this moment where you know that life is going to continue. So life will continue here. And I wonder, because we don't hear again about the Intrepid, I wonder, did things change there? Did maybe her character, maybe they didn't kill her off? Maybe they changed this somehow.
In a sci-fi standard way, where she comes back from an alternate timeline and like Tasha Yar kind of thing. Like,
exactly. Hopefully not quite as tragic as that ended.
Oh my God. Incredible moment in this third coda. I actually posted this on Facebook today. Don't you ever wonder about how your life could have been different? Don't you ever wonder if things just happened a little differently, you might have a different job or a different husband or different children? Do you think you would have been happier? And if you could see that other life, how would that make you feel? And these are the kind of questions that I ask myself like on a daily basis, because I struggle with like anxiety and depression and all that fun stuff. And these are the questions that come up in my brain when I wake up in the morning and prevent me from going to work and prevent me from living my life that day, you know? And so to like sit here and read it in this beautiful story about, you know, her finding her life through this character that basically her, but not her. And that connected with me a lot.
Yeah.
So I didn't expect to connect so much with a comedy novel, you know? A dramedy, whatever you want to call it.
Honestly, when I first read the premise, I was like, oh, so it's basically the book of Galaxy Quest.
But it's so much deeper than that.
It's so much better.
Yeah. John Scalzi's just crafted something funny and silly, but at the same time beautiful and heartwarming. And at the end of the day, reading this novel is probably one of the most joyous novels I've ever read. You know, that's probably the best way I can describe it. It's so full of heart and so full of fun and so lively, and it's a wonderful read. Even though it's not technically a Star Trek novel, and we're covering it on a Star Trek podcast, but I think it has enough Star Trek in it to be considered an offshoot of a Star Trek novel.
It's like in the yard of Star Trek.
It's like Galaxy Quest is in the yard of Star Trek, right? It's kind of a parody, but it fits in there somehow. It's got that meat in it that Star Trek stories always have.
And talking about comedy and how it's a comedy novel, kind of like there has to be a balance. It can't, you know, life can't always be fun. It can't always be funny. You know, there's deep and dark in life too.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to live through both.
I think that brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is the theme of love in this book. In the third coda, since we're still there, there's a moment where Samantha, who is the doppelganger of Jenkins' now dead wife, is on what she thinks is a bad date, but it's really not a bad date at all. This gentleman that she's on a date with is a widower, just like Jenkins in The Intrepid. And he kind of sums up, he's kind of a parallel of Jenkins in a way, because he talks about how hard it is for him to get out here and date and make connections and all that stuff. They're talking about love. Do you think that's how it works, Samantha asks? That you have just that one person you love? I don't know, Brian says. For everyone in the world, I don't think so. People look at love all sorts of ways. I think there are some people who can love someone, and if they die, they can love someone else. I was a best man to a college friend whose wife died, and then 5 years later watched him marry someone else. He was crying his eyes out in joy both times. So no, I don't think that's how it works for everyone. But I think maybe that's how it's going to work for me. So that's super depressing, but in a comedy novel, right? But then, like, it drew me back to a moment, a silly moment, but it was intended to be funny. But when I read it over and over again, I realized how serious it was. It's a moment where Kerensky meets his doppelganger, and they have a moment alone. And since they're both very self-indulgent and self-involved,
The very questionable moment.
yes, that's the moment. I'm not going to give it away, but they may or may not have slept with themselves. But it ended up being like this, again, a really powerful like passage in the book. Tell me, Maya, have you ever met someone who you know so completely, so exactly, and so perfectly that it's like the two of you share the same body, thoughts, and desires, and had that feeling compounded by the knowledge that how you feel about them is exactly how they feel about you, right down to the very last atom of your being? Have you? And it describes like perfectly like the kind of relationship that I strive for every day in life. Mm-hmm. Like even if it's just friends, acquaintances, whatever, like this is the kind of thing, this is like the goal. At the end of a conversation with someone, I want to feel like that. Maybe not to that degree, but you know, I want to feel like I understand people. I want to feel like I understand their desires. I want to know how they're feeling. Like I want to know all that stuff. And so that passage stuck out to me, even though it's in the middle of this very silly, comical moment, but it stood out to me as this very powerful thing.
Well, I mean, no one knows you better than you, and no one knows what you want to talk about, your desires, more than you. So, I mean, in a sense, that makes sense. His reaction.
I don't want to date myself, mind you,
no.
But you know.
I mean, I'd probably end up dumping myself.
Because we're both so effing crazy. Fracking crazy, I'll say fracking.
Yes, frack. His reaction, I loved his reaction, if I can go into that.
Yeah, go for it.
Jesus, Kerensky says, looking around. You people, I have one of the most incredible experiences I'll ever have. Talking with the one person who really gets me, who really understands me. And you're all down here thinking I'm performing some sort of time-traveling incestuous masturbation thing? Thanks so very much for crapping on my amazing, life-altering experience. You all make me sick.
Do you have any other comedy moments that we can lighten this episode up with? Because I feel like for a comedy novel, this episode's been very fucking serious.
So they decide to go into the past. When they go in the past, they need to take a higher member with them than the Redshirts because they don't want to die. Because the lieutenants and whatnot don't.
Exactly. Because they got to take someone whose name is in the credits, basically. So they don't.
They kidnap him, but when they kidnap Kerensky, who is just the douchiest of the douches, they take his pants. And it becomes a
running gag, doesn't it?
That he has no pants, and so
then he gets caught running outside of the Best Western they're staying at. Gets caught on Gawker, which, as we all know, is this celebrity humiliation site. It exists. It's a real site. It exists.
Oh, is it real?
It's not made up. No, it exists. It's like TMZ. It's kind of like that, but more. You know, look at what embarrassing thing this celebrity did.
So. Then, when they kidnap his doppelganger in the past, they take his pants too.
Just for funsies.
And I
Their reasoning is so funny. Well, we needed to talk to you, so we took your pants. If everybody who needed to talk to me took my pants, if I had a nickel.
Just wouldn't have any pants.
I could buy a new pair of pants for myself.
I could never determine, though, whether it was Maya's idea or whether it was Doll's idea to take the pants.
It was totally Doll's idea. I mean, he's a prude, but come on, let's be real.
I did find it funny that Doll, as the main character, had no love interest. at all.
I kind of like that though,
I did too.
because then you fall into that trap.
Yeah.
You know, I'm
kind
glad that Duval ended up with Krensky in the novel, because I'm like, oh, now I don't have to worry about Dahl. You know? Although listening to the audiobook, it was really interesting when those two had scenes together, because it was like Dahl said, Duval said, Dahl said, and I was like, who's talking right now? I don't understand.
Well, so we had Duval, we had Hester and Hanson.
Yeah, they all kind of had like matchy names.
And then there was Jasper, that was Fenn's first name, that we learned later. Jasper,
That was Hester's first name, yeah.
Oh, was it Hester?
That was Hester's first name.
Oh.
Too many, I know.
So another characterization that I found hilarious was Captain Abernathy. You only saw the captain here and there. I totally got airplane captain vibes from the movie Airplane.
Oh my gosh.
Because he could never...
Don't call me Shirley. Roger.
He could never remember Dahl's name. He was like, Dill.
It reminded me of deviled eggs every time he said it. I don't know why.
But he was just like the dumbest. It's like, how
The dumbest captain
did
ever.
you become
How did you become
captain?
captain? You can't even remember your crewman's name? Captain Kirk knew all of his crewman's name. No, he didn't. That's not true. I'm lying there.
Yeah.
Captain Picard knew everybody's name. That's not true either. None of it's true.
I bet Cisco did.
Cisco definitely knew everybody's name.
And he knew all the Bajorans' names too.
He was the emissary. He was required to. But anyway, speaking of Star Trek, canon connections.
You think it's all connected somehow?
Did you find any blatantly obvious... I mean, we already talked about Star Trek 4 with the time travel thing. Were there any other like little moments that you tied back to a specific episode of Star Trek or any moment in Star Trek that you saw in this book?
Quite a few.
Let's run through them. Let's go.
Okay.
Because I don't have any. So
I kind of felt in the beginning when Dahl was on the ship and he didn't know what was going on. It brought back a very recent Michael Burnham on Discovery when she didn't understand the spore drive, and you could, I think she even says at one point, what's going on this ship or something. And so, because I mean, she was totally curious the entire time.
The episode 3, I think, when we saw the black badges and never saw them again.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, still have issues with that.
So I felt a really big connection there. We talked about what I felt with like the 2009 Star Trek.
Yes.
All the youngins.
I got the vibe from that, yeah.
Also with the time travel, I forget the titles of the episodes. I think it's season 3 Voyager, the 2-parter when they go back in time.
Yeah.
And they actually go to the Griffith Observatory.
Yeah.
Oh, and then of course the Intrepid. I mean, Intrepid was the Voyager class vessel. Another light connection was that mysterious box, the one that kind of brings everything into being.
Yes, the box.
I was reminded kind of, it had kind of Q-like powers in a sense.
It kind of did.
But then also it
kind of reminded me of Doctor Who, though. It goes ding when there's stuff.
To me, it almost was like a replicator too, in a sense. It's like, oh, well, we need this on a starship. Where are we going to get this? Oh, just
I don't know. Ask the
put it in the
box.
replicator. Yeah. And then there it is. And of course, the obvious Redshirts. I mean,
Yeah.
then
Which is a blatant TOS ripoff, but that's what this whole novel's about. I actually had a comment online this morning from Eric Profanchik, who was our first guest on Queer Trek, who said he didn't enjoy this novel as much as he could have because he wanted it to be more red shirt-ish. And I'm not sure what that means, but I think he was talking about he just wanted them to be... He didn't want them to be the protagonist. He just wanted it to be centered, but like this other thing was happening.
I could see that because this really does go against what a red shirt was. This turns the red shirts
Into the heroes. Right. it's a little bit Star Trek Discovery in a way, because that show focuses on
Oh, that was my other.
the lower decks kind of way,
And my
right?
other. Lower Decks, the TNG episode.
Yes.
Another slight connection I kind of felt was the Hester Matthew,
Yes.
kind of the sacrifice that he made to stay back in time to save the universe. It was a very Spock moment to me, since Spock sacrifices himself to save everyone.
It was also kind of a Tasha Yar moment too,
It was
because she, in
Yesterday's Enterprise.
Yesterday's Enterprise, she ends up staying on the Enterprise C because she knows her tactical knowledge will come in handy so that the Enterprise D can get away from the Klingons?
It was Klingons, yeah.
The Klingons. So, we got comedy, we got love,
We got Daft.
we got meta, we got time travel. I mean, this book has it all.
It really does.
So, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Since these characters in the book kind of go in and out of this narrative story, they kind of snap, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're in the narrative and they're saying things. They don't know why they're saying them, but it's because someone's writing it for them. So, if we look at Star Trek and pick any crew you want, what is that crew doing when the narrative stops? During the commercial break, in between episodes, when they're not in the narrative, what is that crew doing?
See, I have a hard time thinking about it this way, because to me, and I mean, I started watching Star Trek when I was in middle school, and I mean,
That's earlier than I started watching it.
up to current oldness. To me, it was so real to me. I mean, the Enterprise D was a real place to me. Especially like the promenade on D Space Nine was a real place to me. So to me, it's like life is going on whether they're there or not. So that's kind of like that one quote that I read that was talking about what Dahl was going to do. Whatever you want to be will be up to you and only you. It will happen away from the eyes of any audience and from the hand of any writer. You will be your own man. So to me, that's kind of saying that even if the writers aren't writing this one character, they're still doing things. Like, even though we never see Keiko, she's still around.
Yeah, she's teaching school. She's doing her thing.
She's got the fire extinguishers ready.
I just want to know what Captain Janeway is doing when she's not hitting those one-liners like, time to take out the garbage. And then we hit a commercial and she's like, why the F did I say that?
She's drinking coffee and putting on period piece clothing.
Is she drinking coffee because she likes coffee? Or is she drinking coffee because the writers want her to drink coffee?
Does she spike that coffee?
These are the kind of mind-exploding things we need to think about now that we've read this book.
It'll make season 2 of Discovery very interesting.
Are there any quotes that you want to read that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet?
I really did a horrible job of reading all my favorite quotes too soon. Okay,
I do that all the time.
one of them that
I end up reading like my favorite quote in the book like right away, and I'm like, why did I do that?
One of them that I really enjoyed, this one was comedy. This one brought me back to McCoy. It was when Kerensky was sick. He had some kind of, I don't remember what kind of sickness he had, but it was up to Dahl to create some kind of antidote. Mm-hmm. So Captain Abernathy says, damn it, man. This is Kerensky we're talking about. If God can make the universe in 6 days, surely you can make a counterbacterial in 6 hours. To me, that's totally something that Dr. McCoy would have said.
Yeah. I think Captain Kirk would have said that to McCoy.
Probably.
I had one. It's probably like my favorite thing from the book. Yes. It's at the very end of the narrative before the coda chapters. So this is Dahl talking. Because whether fictional or not, on a spaceship, a television show, or in something else entirely, he still had work to do. surrounded by his friends and the crew of the Intrepid. And that's just what he did. Until the day 6 months later when a system failure caused the Intrepid to plow into a small asteroid, vaporizing the ship and killing everyone on board instantly. No. I'm just with you. They all lived happily ever after. Seriously.
I will totally admit it when I read that, because I didn't read the next little
I didn't read the next little line, and I read this, and I'm just like, what? And then I turned the page, and I'm like, oh, he trolled us. He totally trolled us.
But I was totally, by this time, these are my people. And so I read this, and I just...
And you throw the book across the room.
This is me we're talking about. I burst into tears. And I was like, oh my gosh, no. But,
and then you turn the page, and you're like, oh, okay.
I'm like, oh, that...
I think this is a good point to go ahead and shelve this novel. Before we do, is there anything else you want to talk about that we haven't covered?
I did see in my notes my Q character, and now I'm glad I saw it. It was Hanson. Hanson was Q.
He was.
He was the one who was kind of goading Doll through things. He was talking Doll through things, being kind of there but not there.
Mm-hmm.
He was Q. Not Q as in powerful, but Q as in I kind of know a little more than I'm saying, but I'm not going to tell you.
But I'm not going to tell you because I'm Q and I'm omnipotent, mon capitaine. All right, so let's move in to the, as the mission log would say, the morals, meanings, and messages of the text. So what I have for this section, besides being a great comedy and a great story all around, don't take others for granted. Don't take your Redshirts for granted. Be kind to others because you don't know how long you'll have. You could be killed on some away mission. You don't know. Could be eaten by sandworms. You don't know. Ice shark. Whatever that is. And to quote our beloved Captain Picard, live for now. Now is the most precious time. And I got that from Coda 3. Coda 3, I think, to me, Coda 3 was the heart and soul of this novel.
It really was.
What did you pick up from it?
To me, there was just this feeling of rebirth. And the rebirth was not only Hester and Matthew, and it wasn't just Jenkins' wife, Margaret. Margaret was her name. So it wasn't just Margaret and Samantha. It was just rebirth because everything changes. And things change if we let them change, if we force them to change.
Very well said. I agree with you completely, yeah. If you had to give it a rating, a warp rating, a delta rating.
Let's see. I'm going to say I'd give it 4.5 Redshirts hanging in the closet.
4.5 Redshirts hanging in the closet. I'm going to give this warp 9.5.
Oh.
I love this novel. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was the perfect blend of comedy and interesting story and heart and soul, and the characters were engaging, and they were true to life. I think they spoke like real people would speak.
Yes.
They had the mentality of real people. They were very well written. They had a lot of depth. Even the minor characters in this novel had a lot of depth to them. And I think the Hugo Award that John Scalzi won for this novel is very well deserved.
Yes.
I think it's the perfect...
Well, and it illustrates the ridiculousness that we place on the lead characters in these beloved sci-fi shows that we take in so often.
I mean, it's kind of it's satire, like Galaxy Quest is satire, but it's fun. It's an interesting dive into the other side of the fence that we don't often see, and how that plays out. Even though it's a ridiculous concept, but
and so I can clarify, so my newfound audience doesn't think that I'm like warped out there. It was a 4.5 Redshirts out of 5 Redshirts.
Okay, good.
Just for clarification.
High marks.
High marks.
High marks.
Yes.
Good. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for Redshirts by John Scalzi. But be sure to tune in next time on Reading Trek, because I will be joined by Shashank Avaru, our beloved comic books expert and Polytrek's host for IDW's Star Trek Discovery, The Light of Kahless, and Star Trek Discovery Succession, both written by Kirsten Beyer and Mike Johnson. That will be next time on Reading Trek.
Wow, is that a book?
Christian, if people want to get a hold of you to continue the conversation about Redshirts, how can they do that?
Well, I'm on my never used Twitter at Juel_05, or you can find me on Facebook at Christian Alonso.
You can find me on Twitter at Time Travel Marty. And if you'd like to share your thoughts on this week's episode or your thoughts on Redshirts by John Scalzi, we would love to hear from you. You can reach Reading Trek by sending us a tweet to @ReadingTrek or by email at readingtrekpodcast@gmail.com. And again, you can also visit readingtrek.thetricordertransmissions.com. Click on that little link on the sidebar and record us a little voice memo, because we would love to hear what you have to say. And please, if you're enjoying the show, leave us a star rating and review on iTunes. It really helps out a lot with our visibility, so more people can come in and enjoy these books and enjoy the show. And with that, Captain Picard would like us to let him read in peace.
I will leave you now to your book.
That is all I ask.
Well, I mean, there's a few credited Starfleet people who die, but we won't mention that. But,
Too soon. I know who you're talking about, but too soon.
yeah.
You're like, is it though?
Yeah. Well, there's a few more. I mean, come on. We got Tasha Yar.
Mm-hmm.
We got Jadzia.
Oh.
We got,
I can't talk about that.
we got Trip.
I can't talk about that either.
Okay. And then we had...
I can't talk about it, but not
Yeah.
yet. I'm not ready. Okay, bye.